All right, welcome back. Thursday. I think it's Thursday. Yeah, it's Thursday. And it's our second lecture of the day. First one was short one. I'll try to keep this one short too. I'm feeling benevolent here on Thursday. I'll try to reach out to all of you, each of you individually via email. Getting a lot of people great responses on the discussion board. That's good. Getting some people not responding on the discussion board, not so good. Remember, that's 50 points towards your final score. So just get in there, just dive in. Water's fine. Had some good responses, and I've got a question already today about who's some good bosses, bad bosses you've had. What skills do they have to make them such? And so, want you to discuss that as well. And let's see if there's kind of a underlying theme about what makes a good boss, what makes a bad boss, and or what you guys relate to. And I think communication will probably play a part in that. The reason I feel that is what I'm about to show you here. Principle of past performance. This is something I normally show in my in class because when I have a class in person, I can tell you automatically that I'm going to have two people that are going to miss 15 or more classes. I'm going to have X number miss 10 or more. It's just because of something called the principle of past performance. And that is, I've been teaching this class a long time, and generally people end up doing the same things over and over and over again, and that's called the principle of past performance. And so what I would tell you in this is don't fall in that trap here. In the online class, I can already tell you that there's going to be a couple people in the online class that are not watching or not paying attention, just going into the tests, and that costs you 50 points right off the bat if you're not filling in your discussion board stuff. But I'm going to tell you, just from principle of past performance, I'd love to see that be broken. Um, Gabby is in this class. She plays for Coach Stone, and she understands that philosophy. Coach Stone is a big believer in the principle of past performance. The other thing I'm going to tell you is just have it says final thought. It's an initial thought. Most folks are about as happy as they make their minds up to be. Abraham Lincoln said that. Again, remember your attitude, your demeanor, your way of looking at things is your choice. So make sure it's a good choice. I talked yesterday about ESPN, and I wanted to show you something I thought was kind of interesting about ESPN. Is that I'm going to show you first of all. Let's go here and look at this is Outkick the Coverage. It's a sports website. ESPN loses 500,000 subscribers in April, and it talks about how unsettling that is that ESPN is losing that number, and they give you some dollar amounts of what they're missing. And remember, I had a number of $5 or whatever per subscriber. We do now know that ESPN charges, I believe, $7.31 per subscriber for just ESPN, and the other ones cost more. So it appears to be all doom and gloom, right? $8 a month, 500,000 lost subscribers, 12 months a year. That's $48 million a year in revenue. But how about this? Let's look at Sports Business Insider. And it talks about ESPN again. And remember, ESPN is the forerunner of our dual product market that we talk about. That's a test question for you. And it shows since '07, actually all the way since '87, ESPN subscribers and their fees per subscribers. So you can see they started out somewhere around 40 million in 1987 to peaked at 100 million in 11, and now they're coming back down again. But if you look at that pie graph and you look at the chart there, um, it's not congruent, right? They're charging a little bit more now, and what they're doing is they're making up the lost subscribers with the cost per subscriber. So you look at their subscriber revenue, which is in 2017 as high as it's ever been. So again, there's probably going to be some diminishing return on that, and don't forget two things. Remember, we are a dual product market. So ESPN, while they are making up their subscriber revenue, they are losing some advertising revenue because they don't have the same number of eyeballs that they had a couple of years ago. And eyeballs are just as important in the overall scheme of things as everything else because they charge the advertisers based on the number of people looking, etc. And so when you think about things like live television sports events, when they're paying subscriber fees and all these other things, when they're paying rights fees to universities or NFL or MLB, less people watching, less people, uh, less dollars they can get them from the advertisers, and it turns out to be less money they can offer the sports franchises. So it'd be interesting to see how that shakes out. So again, interesting for you to read these things and look at them from the perspective of I'm a manager and how do managers look at those things. So several years ago, ESPN was bought out by Disney, the Disney Corporation. They bought ABC, and and ESPN was part of that. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about the media marketplace in electronic media, mergers, alliances, partnerships, those kind of things. And let me just get out in front of it. This is going to be very painful. It's going to be a painful slides we're going to look through, but it'll help us in the long run understanding where we are. So what we want to do is understand the basic market economies in which we deal in and competing in for audiences and advertisers. So again, we just looked at ESPN. They're in the audience. They're in the advertiser business, right? They're looking to try to get eyeballs. They're looking to try to get advertisers. And so you've got to understand somewhat the economy. Understanding those helps you develop your programming strategies, your advertising strategies, and your branding strategies. If you understand the market and the market from which you're in, what shows you're going to put in, how you're going to go into it. We talked a little bit about ESPN again. The one programming that remains strong is live sports broadcasts, and that's one thing that they can still count on and helps them with their advertising as well. And mergers, acquisitions, partnerships, they affect the structure and management aspects of electronic media. So, target marketing and target audiences reflect the goal of reaching specific types of audiences. You target your marketing, and you're trying to get specific audiences based on what you're trying to achieve. You guys are in the sweet spot. College students are amongst the most highly sought after audiences there are. Media outlets try to attract enough of the audience to get a dominant share of a market. There's a news station here in Lubbock, Channel 11, that has been the dominant news station for as long as I can remember, since the late 80s, early 90s. And here they are 20 years later, still the dominant market. The other stations are trying to attract enough of an audience to compete with that. So a market can be defined in several ways. A market is obviously a place where consumers and sellers interact with each other. So whatever that would be, the internet can be a market. People going on to look for clothing or whatever they want to purchase. And then in our industry, market is also defined by the geographical boundaries ranked by the size of the population. So New York is the number one market. It's a major market. Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, Dallas, all major markets. The media markets are from 51 to 100. Lubbock is a small market, and that is a market size above 100. I believe Lubbock, it changes a little bit. It's somewhere 140, 141, 144, I think, one time. So it's right around that area. That plays a role for advertising. Sometimes a big advertiser, let's say General Mills, might say, all right, let's buy advertising in the top 100 markets in the country. Lubbock gets left out. Sometimes they say, let's buy in the top 150 markets. Then Lubbock gets in. So it does affect things, the size of your market. You know, if you want to be a talent, if you want to be a news person, a reporter, this used to be a very big deal, right? You'd start in a small market, you move to another market, you move to a medium market, eventually work your way up to a major market. That's changed a lot. The internet and the way people can do their own thing now has changed that a little bit. You can do something in your home, you can shoot your own podcast type of a situation, and next thing you know, you can move to a major market pretty quickly. The standard way of doing things is a little bit different. Plus, you're at home, and you can, if you get enough of a market, you can live where you want to live, right? And do what you want to do. You don't have to move into a actual geographical large market. The internet is a great equalizer. Again, dual product market. Companies produce one product, but they participate in a separate good and service market. So again, you've got the one product, and then you can sell it to advertisers. That's a dual product market. Look at it again. First market, the good is a radio format, a TV program, etc. content is targeted to consumers, and then you measure the consumption, who's watching it, who's buying it, those type of things. And the second market involves the selling of advertising. And again, this is why where ESPN gets hurt a little bit. Advertising prices vary according to audience ratings. The more people you have watching, the higher demand for the show, the higher demand for your advertising. And again, just like anything else, more money you charge, higher profit, higher revenue. So we operate in a specific area or geographic market. This is basically television and radio. The FCC mandates that. The FCC says, hey, there are going to be a certain number of licenses in this area. You just couldn't say tomorrow, hey, I want to open up a radio station in Lubbock, Texas. You have to go to the FCC, we're a highly regulated industry, and say, I want to do that. You have to apply for it. There have to be certain things you go through. And they might tell you, hey, the only station available to you is in this market. And then you have to decide if that's where you want to be operating in. And the audience is basically limited to the geographic boundaries of the market. Again, what's the great equalizer? The internet is the great equalizer. That's so good. I'm writing that down. That is going to be a test question. The internet, I'm going to say, what is the great equalizer? And the answer is going to be the internet. The internet is the equalizer and all that, because your potential audience is whoever can log into a computer, different from television. Your television station, you turn on a TV station, you're only getting the TV stations in that market. But again, what's the great equalizer? Tell me what the great equalizer is. Because you can put your news and other things on the internet and people can watch. And that's why now you have radio shows that used to be contained locally. Now if somebody really loves a local radio show, no matter where they move or listen to or live, they can listen to a program. So again, the internet changes all that. Defining a media market involves combining the product and the geographic aspects of the market. And this identifies a specific market in which a media firm can offer some of its products to advertisers or consumers. So you can say, I own this part of the market. So again, just depends on how you define it. Media market might be different sometimes based on the geography of where you are. Kind of confusing a little bit, but what you want to just remember is, especially in television and radio, you are contained by a certain geographic area. But again, you're not necessarily as contained by what you can put on and what you can put on the internet and have living out there for anyone to listen to. The number of sellers in a particular market is affected by the characteristics of the market, and this is referred to as market structure. The market structure basically is saying how many sellers are in this market, how many television stations are in this market, how many radio stations are in this market, how many newspapers. Again, a small town like Lubbock just has one newspaper, but in other areas you might have more than one newspaper. That's your market structure. So talking about market structure, and we'll just go through these things. And again, did I not promise you this was going to be pretty boring? It is, but there are certain criteria that helps identify a market structure. First one being the concentration. We're going to go over all these. Concentration of buyers and sellers in the market. Then how do you differentiate among the products? What are the barriers to entry for a new competitor? What are the cost structures? And is there vertical integration? So let's start with concentration in the market. The number of producers or sellers in the market explains the degree of concentration in the market. The market is considered concentrated if revenues are controlled by a limited number of companies. If there's just a few, that's a concentrated market. So there's some calculations that go into that. We don't care about these things. We're not going to figure these things out. But basically, you're saying if there's just a few competitors that are really controlling the majority of the revenue, it's concentrated. So again, let's just take a small market, Midland, Odessa, Amarillo, Lubbock, there's 3 or 4 television stations that are getting the majority of the revenue. It's a highly concentrated market. Don't worry about the ratios and things. Product differentiation refers to perceived differences among the products. Radio is highly differentiated. They have unique formats. They've got call letters. They've got logos. They have on-air personalities. They have the websites designed for different things. I'm not sure why there's a hyphen in website. Much more so than television, a local television station, a local radio station is really differentiated by all these things we look at. And again, remember that in a test, especially with personalities. People think that about radio stations. Barriers to entry basically are what's keeping you from doing it. In electronic media, primarily capital, right? Even if you went and said, hey, there's an opening here and I can get a station in this area, are you just going to go out and buy a satellite dish and start a television station? Probably not. Or a radio station? Probably not. The barriers to entry are extremely difficult. You got to pay people, you've got to get the equipment. It's a huge financial investment, so that makes it a little more difficult. And sometimes it involves a regulatory policy, and we'll go through these very late in the semester, but just how different acts prohibited things. There used to be a limit on number of stations you can own in the market. That's a little bit different now, and so we'll talk about that later. But barriers to entry, just think about barriers to entry to mean what keeps you from getting in that business. Cost structures are basically what it costs, fixed cost versus your variable cost, to produce a product. What does it take to open the door every day? You have certain fixed costs. What's it cost you to turn on the lights, open the door, pay the personnel, and everything else? What is involved in that? That's your cost structure. And there's such a thing as economies of scale, which means if you do more of one thing, you get a better price on it. Printing is a great example of this. Sometimes if you're printing something like a physical thing, like a book, a magazine, or something like that, sometimes it makes more sense to print more of them just because your cost structure is down a little bit. So there's something called economy of scale. That's why we see companies merge and they start thinking, hey, the staff we can combine our staffs, and there's a certain economy of scale. We only have to have one sales staff. We only have to have one office staff, and that's part of your cost structure. Vertical integration means when you control multiple aspects of the production, the distribution, and the exhibition of the products. Sony is a great example. They have movie theaters. They produce films. They have all kinds of different ways that they're involved on the lower end of it. And so there's some vertical integration about that happens. So again, you go back. Market structure. Number of producers and sellers in the market. What's the difference between the products? What are the barriers to entry? What are your cost structures? What are the costs to produce? And what's your ability to have vertical integration? All of that makes up your market structure. Now, you know the market structure. There are 4 types of market structure, and those are identified as the theory of the firm. And we're just going to look at these really quickly. A monopoly, an oligopoly, monopolistic competition, and a perfect competition. Monopoly is basically when you have, well, let's look at this first. The 4 types of market structure can be presented kind of as a continuum, right? Monopoly and perfect competition would be complete opposite ends, and then in the middle you have an oligopoly and monopolistic competition. In a monopoly, there's a single seller, dominates the market. True monopoly offers no clear substitute for the product. Cable television is a great example. There's generally one cable provider in a market. It's hard to get in and hard to get into that market. Now, there are things like Dish and AT&T and some other things, but generally there's a tough sell. Murdoch Company in Great Britain has a monopoly basically on media. An oligopoly features 3 or more sellers of the product. A market dominated by a few firms that hold a similar share. They're interdependent of each other, and the actions of one leads the others. Mobile phones are kind of an example of this, right? There's a few Verizon, AT&T. There's a few that are right there, Sprint, that are on the top, and then the others kind of follow along. Monopolistic competition exists when many sellers offer similar products that are not perfect substitutes for one another, and the barriers to entry are not great, and each firm attempts to differentiate its products to the consumer through advertising, promotion, location, service, quality. It's not electronic media, but think about like restaurants, right? There's a lot of restaurants that are very similar to each other, and they're competing with each other based on, hey, do you want to get Mexican food here across town, or Over here, it's sometimes the advertising works, sometimes location works, sometimes whatever. Cutting your hair, it's the same thing. Dry cleaners, the same thing. And then a perfect competition means there's many sellers, um, no firm dominates, there's no barriers to entry. Individual companies establish their prices, and there's no interaction on that. And this is a great note. There are no examples of a perfectly competitive market structure in electronic media. That'd probably be another great question. Of there are no examples of a perfectly competitive market structure in electronic media. And mostly, if you look at this, in most cases, barriers to entry in electronic media are pretty high. There's been obviously a lot of chaos across media during the 90s and into where we are now. Economic changes, technology changes, regulatory changes, global and social forces are just some things that have changed things. I mean, just think about the economy and how the economy changes and affects the business cycle. Um, I told you about my business the other day. 9/11 terrorist attack caused a downturn in the economy. It cost me basically a lot of business. You just can't control some of those things. You work and live in Lubbock. You're controlled by advertising is controlled by the cotton industry. If cotton is doing well, guess what? Truck companies are selling trucks and they're advertising trucks. It's across the board. So that's why as a manager, you have to say, hey, market's good. Let's take advantage of that. And you also have to be prepared. Hey, the bad cotton crop, we're not going to probably sell as much advertising this year. Just technology, right? You're doing all these different things, and this is from the book, analog to digital, integration of the computer, telephone, and television into a single device. This is known as convergence, right? All of a sudden, you have one device. You can do everything you want to on your phone or on your pad or whatever, on your iPad. Doesn't matter. That's called convergence. That's part of technology. And again, because we don't understand what's happening, we don't really know how the industry is going to be affected. I had that about the diffusion theory, but I'm not going to worry about that today. And again, electronic media managers must understand that things are going to be different, and you have to make sure you pay attention to that and keep your eye on that. Regulatory forces, we talked about this. Ownership limits were relaxed for broadcasting. They changed cross-ownership rules, allowed cable operators and telecommunications companies to merge, allowed radio stations and television stations to have the same owners. It's just part of the changing world. And so radio, cable, telecom, all those things have been dramatically restructured and consolidated to some extent. And we'll see more and more of that as the years go on. Just remember, we have to pay attention a lot to regulatory forces and what people allow. And then global forces. The world's changing. And again, you could do something today that somebody in Sweden could watch. It's opened up the world. It's opened up the way we all operate. It opens up how we all do business. You can sell things now anywhere. Let's look at just some of these things. U.S. markets are almost saturated technology-wise. 99% of all households have a radio or television. 96% of all households have some sort of telephone. 85% of all households have a DVR. 83% of all households subscribe to cable or something like cable. That number is probably going to go down as you guys start going out in the world because you are renowned cord cutters. But again, things exist outside of the United States. The regions outside the U.S. are out there, and we have a number of media powers emerging in different areas throughout the world. Obviously in North America, but also in Western Europe and in Japan. Some of the biggest media powers exist in Japan. And again, the globalization means everything you do, you have to think about, hey, there's a big market out there for beyond just where we are. And in terms of demographics, society is changing. Americans are growing older. All those things. Baby boom group is approaching retirement age, and we're living longer. Our retirements have to last longer, and then we're also experiencing an ethnic change as well. Latino population is the fastest growing minority group in the United States. And I think this has already happened now. African Americans will no longer be the largest minority group in the U.S. So how does that affect you? And how does that affect your business? And how does that affect what you're doing? How does that affect you in what you're majoring in? How does it affect you in what you're taking in foreign language, right? And sometime between 2040 and 2050, Anglo population will no longer be the majority ethnic group in the U.S. So just things to think about. We are a true melting pot, and that's, to me, it's great, right? Diversity is great, and that's what makes this country great, the diversity that we have. And again, there's so many different ways. And this is, I love this too. This is, I should update this slide because this is from the early stages of the book. The huge interest in computers and acquiring them has contributed to this. Obviously, people can receive their news. Computers now permeate society, and traditional media is impacted by that. And people are using their computers for different things. And I'm going to skip to these because don't even want to look at some of it. Synergy is basically when two companies operate more efficiently as one business. Let's say you have a magazine and you buy a paper company, right? Hey, we own the paper that we're printing on. That's synergy. There's some synergy there. So that's just a way you look at when you look at how media companies get together and they form strategic alliances. So let's finish up here. When a strategic alliance occurs, media looks at a couple things. Can we share the capital? Can we share costs? Does this merger give us new markets? Does it increase our value? And does it reduce our risk? If it does those things, it generally means it's a good strategic partnership that you want to do and a good alliance that you want to have. And again, strategic alliances take several forms. Sometimes it's a merger. Sometimes it's an acquisition. Sometimes it's a joint ownership or a joint venture. And we'll talk about one, I think, tomorrow that's happening. And sometimes they're just an informal venture that they put together and they do those things. And these are, again, some of the older ones. AOL and Time Warner consolidated. There's been lots of different radio industry consolidation. When you look at Facebook, Instagram, and your era, and other, think of apps and things that you use, and do they make sense and how they work? And that'll be one of your first papers I'll have you write about some alliances or mergers that really have affected you and what you see, and do they work or not? Because sometimes alliances prove to be unstable and they're not a really good business decision. For them to succeed, usually they must hit these things. They must be in a complementary business, right? It doesn't make sense for a makeup company to buy a radio station or start a sports website. They need to be complementary. They need to exist in similar worlds. They must have similar business strategies. They must think about, hey, how we're going to make money that's very similar. They need to have clear expectations and agreement about who's spending money on what, where the money's coming from. And then, you got to have compatible management styles. You can't go from a really strict management style to a more laid back style. It doesn't work. You have to have the two, need to be somewhat copacetic for those to work. But if a strategic alliance is going to work, the companies have to be somewhat similar in what they're trying to do. And again, there should be compatibility. The companies should complement each other. And that is spelled complement, like go hand in hand with each other. Not complement like, hey, you look nice. Complement like the colors go well together. Again, I talked about this. If you're in the movie business, you go, hey, all right, we're still selling some DVDs and let's own a DVD company. My daughter works for a record company where they produce records. They actually produce and create the vinyl. If you owned a recording studio, it might make sense to say, hey, let's go right from the recording studio to print your albums, print your vinyl. They complement each other. Those two businesses are very compatible. It wouldn't make sense to go from a restaurant to a company that produces vinyl. So again, there's got to be some kind of strategy there that makes those work. Before you do these things, just evaluate business activity, evaluate who you want the audience to be, and then say, what are the competitive advantages and disadvantages that would work from this? So Anyway, we're going to finish up on that, on strategic alliances in electronic media. Here's what I would tell you when we're looking at tests or where we want to be, um, some of this stuff, and I kind of breezed through this. Two things. If you wanted to put yourself through this, you could go through the same thing again. A. B. I will put these PowerPoints online so you can check that. And C, remember your tests are all online, so if I ask you a question about a strategic alliance, you can do a search and you can probably find the answer on the PowerPoint there. Just want you to kind of think about, though, why businesses get together, why businesses find it necessary to join forces, what are the reasons to join forces, does it make sense, and how will it work? So that's a lot. Put you through a lot today. I guarantee you this will be the worst one we do all semester. So have a great rest of your day. Don't necessarily think I have a discussion board topic for this, but look for tomorrow. I'll ask you a little question about mergers in electronic media, and you'll write your first kind of longer form paper. Won't be too bad, and but just something to get you thinking about some things you've seen in your life, and do they make sense or not. So thanks for watching and listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.